Welcome to the June Ask Me Anything video for the Planet Doug Patreon. I have questions here that I'm going to answer, and I'm doing something very different this time. In fact, I've already answered all of the questions long form, but what I'm going to do is answer them now short form, put this at the very beginning of the video, and this is going to be my TLDR, TLDL, too long, didn't listen version. So these are short, to the point answers, and then afterwards, if you want to, you can listen to my long form answers to all these questions. You can tell me if this is a good idea for an AMA video or not. Question 1 from FV. While you are in Malaysia, have you ever considered staying in Ipoh or a smaller town, as the cost will be lower and it'll be a new place for you to explore? Yes, I've thought about that all the time. I should base myself in Ipoh, in Taiping, in Penang, in Georgetown, in Johor Bahru, in Malacca, some other place, and it would be cheaper and it would be a new place. I just never ever did it because of circumstances. I always had things I needed to do in KL, and it was a convenient place to be, KL, and it's a very convenient transportation hub. Finally, whenever I returned to Malaysia, I never intended to stay as long as I do. I always think I'm going to stay for 1 week, 2 weeks, and leave again. So if I decided in advance, okay, I'm going to stay for 90 days this time, for sure, and I make that plan in advance, then I would go to Ipoh or spend 1 month in Ipoh, 1 month in Malacca, etc. But I never do that because of circumstances and poor planning, basically, on my part. But it's a great suggestion, and I should do it, and I should have done it in the past. I just wasn't organized enough to do it. Next question from Siv, a new member of the Planet Doug Patreon. How do you budget your expenses? Is it like consistency across the months, or when you get an income, you like to be like, let's spend a bit more now and be on restricted living during later months when money is less? Basic answer, I don't budget my expenses at all. Like, I have no organized budget. I don't think about that. The way I have always budgeted is my lifestyle is to always look for the cheapest option. Just look for whatever it is I'm trying to do, stay in a hotel, buy dinner, travel somewhere, whatever it is I'm trying to do, I always look for, these are my options, which one's the cheapest, I choose that one, and I do it that way because then I can travel longer or not work longer. So basically, I try to make my money, the money that I've saved up from my previous job, last as long as possible. Because what I normally do is I work for a while, save all my money, quit my job, and then I don't work for as long as possible, and I try to make that money last as long as possible because I don't have an income during that time. So I don't have a budget that says, oh, I can spend $500 more this month because I earned money. No, I just basically have this much money. I see it draining away, and then when it's gone, I have to go back to work. So all I do is pick the cheapest option that fits within my lifestyle. That's how I budget. Nothing more complicated than that. WanderEats asks, what's a book or documentary or movie that emotionally wrecked you emotionally? Very easy answer to that question, none. I've never been wrecked emotionally by a movie, by a book, by a documentary. I guess being wrecked emotionally, it's just not within my wheelhouse. I'm way too unemotional for that to be affected that deeply by anything. There are lots of books, lots of movies, lots of documentaries that have had an impact on me, both intellectually, emotionally, and shaped how I live, but nothing has ever hit me that hard. I'm just not built that way. Yeah, I'm just not. So that's the easy, short answer to that question. And I have a very long answer in the extended version. But the short answer is none. No, not a single one that I can think of. I could talk about a lot of movies and books that affected me emotionally, but only a little bit. Nothing ever hits me that hard. I'm like Spock. I have no emotions, apparently. Next question from Rai. Hi, Doug. You seem to have made Kuala Lumpur your base of operations over the past few years. What is it about KL that stands out to you compared to other Southeast Asian cities you've spent time in? What keeps drawing you back? Well, pretty easy answer to that question. KL is a transportation hub, very convenient. It has a land border with Thailand and with Singapore. And then from Thailand, you could travel on if you wanted to. 2 land border crossings. KL for flights flies everywhere. There's inexpensive, low-cost airlines like Air Asia that can take you almost anywhere you want to go. It's a modern, developed city in terms of its economy and the stores. So you want to go camera shopping, bicycle part shopping, get a camera fixed. Anything you want to do in that world, everything is there in KL. English is commonly spoken everywhere, so it's very convenient from that point of view to make travel arrangements, to get your camera fixed, to do anything you want to do, to meet people and get to know them as friends and develop a social community, which I can do in KL. I would struggle to do that in like Bangkok or places like that. So ease of communication, familiarity with the culture, and then highly developed MRT system, which I love. The buses and the LRT and MRT, the monorail, just zip, zip, zip anywhere in the city makes life very, very easy. And then there are so many things you can do in the city that I find interesting. All the museums, the food, never run out of new restaurants to check out, new night markets, day markets, morning markets. The mix of cultures, the Chinese, of course, the Indian, the Malay, the different languages, the different types of food. Yeah, great, great city. So those are all the things that make KL stand out for me. Heiko has a technical question. What is the technical device or devices that you want or need most at the moment? All the best from Munich, Germany. Well, if I had to look out at the world of electronics right now, kind of needs or wants, the first thing that jumps into my head, for some reason, is a drone. I'm becoming more and more interested in drones. I probably should have gotten a drone years ago. I just never did. And right now, there seems to be a drone that hits the sweet spot in terms of being a perfect beginner, lower budget drone. Of course, all drones are expensive, but lower budget, hit the sweet spot. That's a DJI Mini 4K. I'd have to do more research, but as far as I can tell, if you're a YouTuber and you're not super professional and you're looking to add drone footage to your videos, this would be the one to pounce on, the DJI Mini 4K. So that would probably be answer number 1. I'm doing a lot more nighttime shooting, and my GoPros are really letting me down because of the poor quality and low light video. So it would be nice to get some sort of a camera that would allow me to shoot better video in low light. And that could be this year. I think DJI is coming out with the DJI Action 6 Pro, I think. If not, the current front runner would be the DJI Action 5 Pro, I believe. I'm intrigued by the Insta360 Ace Pro 2. It's got some elements and some quality, and I like to do things a little bit differently than the norm, and I keep looking at that. Like, you know, if I wanted to get low light capability in an action camera, the Ace Pro 2 might be the way to go, but the Action 5 Pro or the upcoming Action 6 Pro, that would probably be the smarter move to go that direction. And then number 3, I still would love to have an all-purpose vlogging camera. One that does it all. Much better video quality. You can use it in low light situations. You can use it inside a restaurant for like close-ups, good close-ups of your food and the setting. You can use it for cinematic video. It would just be an all-purpose powerful tool. I've always wanted one of those, like action camera, GoPro, but then you also have what I would call a vlogging camera, and I've always wanted to get one. And I've been waiting for the perfect one, but the perfect one has never emerged. But drone, DJI Mini 4K, DJI Action 5 or 6 Pro, those are the ones that jump out at me right now. Next question from Rye. Hi Doug, after seeing so many places and meeting so many people, do you find yourself drawn more to the landscapes or the stories? What tends to leave a bigger impact on you, the place itself or the people you meet there? My answer to that question, my long form answer was, it depends. Depends on the time of life and the country I was in. So when I was younger and a backpacker and an English teacher, I was really drawn to the world of other backpackers, because at that time, it was my first time going to all these countries in Southeast Asia, but I'd also never been to Europe. I'd never met people from Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Spain, Italy, Greece. I'd never met people from any of those countries before, and when I was living in South Korea teaching English, my world was dominated by other English teachers from the United States, Australia, UK. So it was the people that made the biggest impact on me back in those days. The countries were it was more like an adventure playground for me. I didn't have the tools to really appreciate the countries I was in at that time. I was overwhelmed by just the experience of traveling, and I was moving around in a world of backpackers. That was my world. So it's the people that made an impact on me, but they weren't even the people of the country. It was the people from Europe, from the Western world. These days it's the opposite, because I don't meet other foreigners anymore. I'm by myself. So it's the people in the country itself that make an impact on me. I have the tools, the maturity, the experience. We've got Google Translate. So now I interact with local people all the time. But yeah, so a lot more, and it's not so much the foreign people anymore, but there are certain countries that have it all. So I talk about Ethiopia in particular. I never met any foreigners there at all, hardly any, but it was the Ethiopians themselves, and they made a huge impact on me as individuals, because the people in Ethiopia were very individualistic, had distinct personalities and interests, and they really stood out as individual people. And because a lot of people in Ethiopia speak English, I was able to get to know local people very, very well. And I have such strong memories of the Ethiopian people. And I say that because here in Indonesia, for example, the people stand out to me, and yet the people do seem to be very, very similar. So when I say the people of Indonesia, I'm sort of thinking of them as a group, as a population. But a country like Ethiopia, every individual had a strong personality, and Ethiopia had amazing landscape, a variety of landscapes, unlike few countries in the world. So the landscape of Ethiopia really hit me hard, and the people. So it kind of depends on the time of my life and the country that I was in. One more question. I missed it when I did my long form answers, so I haven't even given my long form answer yet. But to be honest, long form and short form are going to be the same. I'm scrolling here to find it. There it is. From Kairul Nizam. Doug, you've spent a long time in places like Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and more, often staying in all sorts of budget hotels, hostels, and guest houses. Some of these places might have untold histories or past events that aren't exactly advertised. Have you ever stayed somewhere during your travels that gave off really creepy or unsettling vibes? Maybe the atmosphere just felt off, or something happened in the middle of the night that made you question whether you were actually alone. Was there ever a moment, mysterious or not, where you thought you saw someone passing by a hallway or lingering in a certain area, but when you looked again, no one was there, even if it was just your imagination? Unfortunately, perhaps, for this interesting question, the answer really is a simple no. Just flat no. I guess I don't have that side to my personality. As I said to WanderEats, I've never been wrecked emotionally by a movie, book, documentary. I don't have that in my personality, in my makeup. And when it comes to sort of like supernatural, creepy elements, ghosts, auras, hauntings, vibes, anything like that, nothing at all. I don't ever have that. When I see something lurking in the shadows, it's always something that is actually there. A rat, a mouse, a cockroach, a spider, a person. I've never had a sense of a presence, of a leftover energy, vibe from history, from anything that happened in a room in the past. No, nothing like that ever. So, yeah, that's my short answer. No, I guess if all of that is out there, I don't have the antenna, I don't have the brain, I don't have the senses to pick up on it. So those are the too long didn't listen versions of the this month's Ask Me Anything video. If you want to hear me babble on a lot longer than that, continue with the video and I expand on those answers quite a bit. Good morning and welcome to the June edition of the Planet Doug Patreon Ask Me Anything video. People have submitted some questions for me and I am going to answer them. Let's dive right into them. No preamble. A rare moment on Planet Doug. The very first question is from FV, and FV writes, while you are in Malaysia, have you ever considered staying in Ipoh or a smaller town, as the costs will be lower and it'll be a new place for you to explore? Short answer is yes. I've thought about it every single time, and I've never done it, mainly because every time I've gone to Malaysia, I never intend to stay as long as I have. Just by circumstances and habit, Kuala Lumpur has sort of ended up being a base for me. So even like way back when I started the YouTube channel officially, I was using Kuala Lumpur as my place to learn how to shoot video, to experiment with cameras, to figure out how to edit video. And way back at the beginning, that seems so far away ago now, the idea was learn how to shoot video for YouTube, get all that figured out, and then get on my bicycle and then continue traveling to a whole bunch of countries by bicycle. That was the idea, believe it or not, at the very beginning. And even I've lost track of everything in the mists of time. Feels like it's been so long. But at some point, I flew to Bangladesh, I flew to Dhaka, and I had my old Olympus camera that was all broken and I didn't have microphones, but those are my first real YouTube videos. And then I basically used Kuala Lumpur as my base to go to Bangladesh for a couple of months, then return to Malaysia, and then I went to Myanmar and returned to Malaysia, and then to Sumatra, returned to Malaysia. So KL was kind of a transit point for me, and then I never intend to stay as long as I end up doing. It always ends up being an accident. So the whole idea is to land in Kuala Lumpur, get reorganized, get reset, go somewhere else. Next thing I know, 3 months have gone by and I've maxed out my visa, and then I leave the country. If I'd made the decision from the beginning, like, okay, I'm flying into Malaysia, I'm going to stay for 3 months, then I would have made the decision, if I'm going to stay in one place, let's do it in Ipoh, let's do it in Taiping, let's do it in Malacca, Johor Bahru, or 3 different cities. I would have planned ahead to do something like that. But I think in my mind, in my lizard brain, I'm not going to be staying very long. So I don't plan ahead to do that. So, yeah, short answer, yeah, I've always thought about it, and then I've just never gotten around to it because of poor planning. And then, I don't know, things happen in KL. I like it there, I'm comfortable there, I know people there, and I always get involved in some sort of epic quest, fixing a camera or doing something, looking for this, doing that, and then it ends up taking much longer than I expect. So yeah, right now, the American not right now, he just left. There's a vlogger I'm following called The American Hobo. He's on a bicycle, and he just rode his bike from Vietnam down all the way to Malaysia. And then he just spent maybe 4 or 5 nights in Ipoh, and he shot some video there. And oddly enough, I've been to Ipoh. I've been all over Malaysia, but it was a long time ago, before the internet even existed, and certainly before YouTube existed. So in a previous lifetime, I traveled, and so long ago, I don't even remember these places, so they would all feel brand new to me if I went to Ipoh, going to Malacca, places like that. Yeah. So, yes, I'd like to do it. Anyway, the American Hobo, he was there, and he shot a bunch of video there, and it was very, very attractive town. It looks like I could spend 3 months just in Ipoh quite easily, never run out of things to do, because even from Ipoh, you could use it as a base to take that beautiful mountain road up into the Cameron Highlands and down again if you were riding your bicycle. You could do a lot of loops out of Ipoh, coming back again. A lot of things to explore inside Ipoh. The history of tin mining in Malaysia, which I'm fascinated by. So yeah, I'd love to spend some time in Ipoh. That's a very good example. Next question is from Siv. I should have asked how to pronounce the name in advance, but this is the name on Patreon. I think he joined the Planet Doug Patreon quite recently. Siv, or Siv, S-I-V. And Siv writes, "Hi Doug, how do you budget your expenses? Is it like consistency across the months? Or when you get an income, you be like, let's spend a bit more now and be on restricted living during later months when money is less?" And Siv did contact me afterwards. He posted this question, and then he watched my previous AMA video, and I sort of talked about money and budgets back then, and he said, well, if you don't want to repeat yourself, you don't have to answer this question. But it's a relatively simple answer, where for a very long time now, I have had no income at all. So what I've done my entire life that I've been in Asia is that I would teach English for a year, as an example, save pretty much all of my salary. Then at the end of the year, the job is over, quit the job, whatever, and then I leave. I was in South Korea at the beginning, so I'd work for 1 year, save as much money as I could, quit all my jobs, and then go traveling for essentially as long as the money will last. So I never had a budget. I never budgeted anything of any kind. I never spent more according to a budget. All I did was, it was just a consistent habit of, when there were options in front of me, I chose the cheapest option, like in all cases. Restaurants, I chose the cheapest restaurant. Hotel, I chose the cheapest hotel. Well, not the super cheapest, because even back in those days, I wasn't comfortable in dorm rooms. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a very light sleeper. If I tried to sleep in a dorm bed with other people, I'm not happy, and I get no sleep at all. My life falls apart. So I can't go dorm living. And I would try, when I was cycling, I would try camping. But in all the countries I've been to, even camping was too difficult for me most of the time. I brought camping equipment, but it was usually used only when I had no other choice, or I was feeling adventurous. But there's never, like in a place like, even for me in the Philippines, it was hard to camp because you couldn't find empty land unless you're on a beach or something. All the land is being used for villages and farming. And then you get so much attention that as you're putting up the tent and you're alone, you gather a crowd of 50 people in a circle around your tent, usually the children from the neighboring villages. You're stuck there. You can't do anything. And I'm often very ill. I'm quite sick to my stomach a lot, and I desperately need to find a private place, that I can treat as a bathroom or find a bathroom. But I can't leave my tent. I need water, but I can't leave my tent because all these people are standing there watching me. Anyway, and then you're out for a day of cycling. You're so hot and sweaty, and to be camping in a tent, it's a really hard life. So ultra budget would be camping out, but I often found that lowered my quality of life so drastically that I would go back up to, okay, let's find the cheapest room I can find. And then back in the backpacking days, even in more recent days, I find a low budget hotel is much better value than camping because your quality of life is so much better, and you even learn and experience much more in that country than you do camping. Because when you're camping, I find all you do is save money. But basically, when the sun goes down, you crawl into your tent and you lie there all night, and then you get up in the morning. And it's just such a struggle, and you didn't have the opportunity to go out exploring, to meet people, to try the local food, to go to the local night market. So you have to balance that. So I guess I'm telling that whole story to say that yes, I always chose the cheapest option, but not like going crazy, like camping out every night, dorm rooms every night. But within my lifestyle, I would always just pick whatever is cheapest. And that was my budget. So it's not like I had a budget, oh, this month I can spend more on food, therefore I will go to a nice restaurant or stay in a nice hotel, or I would never do that. I always chose the cheapest form of transportation, the cheapest hotel, the cheapest food, the cheapest everything, and that was my budget. And the goal was to maximize time where I could be where I was, and I don't have to go back to work. So whatever my nest egg was from the previous year, I just tried to live in such a way that I could live on that nest egg for as long as possible until it runs out. And then that was how I budgeted things. And I didn't keep track. I didn't have categories and calculations and things like that. No, I never really budgeted. Just earn as much money as possible within 1 year, and then live on that money for as long as possible when the job was over, and delay the time when I had to go back to an official job to get an income again. Next question is going to be it could be a very easy one, but I'm not going to take the easy route. I'm going to make it a bit more involved answer, I think. My friend Daryl from the WanderEats YouTube channel, he's trying to find a chink in my armor here with his question. He writes, what's a book or documentary or movie that emotionally wrecked you? Emotionally. And the short answer is none. I mean, wrecked emotionally, that's way too strong for me. I'm not the type of person to be wrecked emotionally, ever. Nothing ever affects me that way. A book or a movie or even a story in the news. I mean, I'm not exactly Spock from Star Trek, completely emotionless, but I don't think I have a very strong emotional reaction to anything. So the short answer to the question would be nothing. No book, no movie, nothing has ever wrecked me emotionally. There might be a movie there where they play the really sad music and something really sad happens in the story and you sort of tear up a little bit. Nobody's immune to that, but beyond that, There's been no emotional wreckage from that. So the answer is none. But kind of a longer answer to that question, I have been affected or impacted by lots of movies and books, lots and lots of things. And his question got me thinking about that, and before I knew it, I made a little bit of a list. I just started thinking about my life, and if I had to pick something, what affected me, had an impact on me, made me change how I lived my life, or sent me down a new pathway in terms of thinking about things. So there's a lot of things like that. And I realized that they fell into a certain category. There's a certain grouping of them. So for example, I first started thinking about things from my childhood, not childhood, but from my youth, or even from childhood, but I started off with my youth. And these were books that just happened to be in my environment. I didn't go out looking for them. I think most of the things I've read in my life at the beginning, I just stumble across them. This is back in the days when there's used bookstores, garage sales selling books, things like that. And all of that life is gone these days. And back in those days, as a youth, I was quite sheltered. So my mother and father are both Dutch immigrants. They came from the Netherlands to Canada as teenagers. My father came pretty much on his own with his sister, but then his sister went back to the Netherlands. So essentially my father, as a young man, he immigrated from the Netherlands after World War II to Canada and lived there by himself. And my mother did the same thing, but as part of her family. And then they were part of a very strong Dutch community in the city where I grew up. And I just grew up in a family that was our entire world, that Dutch community inside this small city in Canada. We were not sophisticated people. We were not worldly people. So it's not like we were getting subscriptions to the New York Times and fancy magazines. And so I was not really aware of the world in any way. I was not connected to the world of anything. Current events, war, politics, art, music, history, culture, nothing. We just sort of lived in this isolated little bubble. And that dictated much of my life, because I feel like I've been able to discover all these things by myself, but later in life. So I've been playing a constant game of catch up, because I didn't really discover the world of literature, music, culture, anything until I left my home city and went to university for the first year. And then it was like, whoa, I met the entire world. And then I had like decades and decades of everything to catch up on, because there was so much I didn't know about. And that's kind of the pattern that my life has followed. However, when I was a young man growing up in my family home, there happened to be some books on the shelf. And I think my mother had signed up for some kind of a book club, like Book of the Month. And these books would just get shipped to our house. And she may not have had control over which ones we got, because some very unusual books ended up on the bookshelves. And I read them all. And a couple of them, for whatever reason, just resonated with me. And I devoured them, and I read them again and again. And one of the very first ones was a book called Alive by Piers Paul Reed. And Alive is the story, I think it was way back in the 70s. There was a rugby club from Uruguay that was flying over the Andes Mountains, and their plane crashed. So it was essentially a survival story. And a lot of the people in the plane died on impact, but a lot of them survived, and a lot of them were injured. And so we had this group of people in this plane trying to survive in the deep Andes Mountains, and their survival story became a big thing. And they became famous because they resorted to eating the bodies of the passengers who died. They were there for so long that they eventually, as a group, they made the decision that if we are going to survive and wait for rescue. We have no choice. We have no food. It's either starve to death or we start eating, because all these bodies were frozen, the people who died, and then we have to start eating these other passengers who passed away on, when the plane crashed. And they were very famous because of that, and then their story became a book, it became a movie. Anyway, I read the book, and I just found it enthralling, and read it again and again. And then since then, my entire lifetime, I've sought out survival stories. There was another one in our house about a famous instance, I forget the name of it now, a group of fishermen, seal fishermen, I believe, were stranded on the ice, on an ice floe, way out in sea, and they had to survive out there, abandoned on the ice field off the coast of Newfoundland, I think. And their story turned into a book. I read that, and my entire lifetime, every time I found a survival story, like Into Thin Air, the famous disaster season on Everest, written by John Krakauer. That book, I've read it multiple times, because back in the old days, you'd find it in hostels, cheap hotels. It'd be like on the bookshelf, and every time I'm looking for something to read, Into Thin Air, and I'd grab it and read it again, and I'd find it again in the next country, in the next hotel. And so yeah, I have a long history of reading survival stories, and it all started with Alive that I had in my home for some reason. And oddly enough, another one of these books that has stuck with me my entire life was Helter Skelter, which was the story of the Manson murders, Sharon Tate, Charles Manson, that whole story. And that book, for whatever reason, I think what it meant, why it made such an impact on me is, like I said, I was very isolated from everything going on in the world. So reading a book about Charles Manson, a cult, these satanic murders in California. I mean, California might have been Mars for me at that time. What do I know about California and Hollywood, places like that? Nothing. So Helter Skelter was like a look into a world that was completely foreign to anything I'd even dreamt of or experienced. So for some reason, Helter Skelter, Charles Manson, and the Tate murders made a big impression on me. And that book has really stuck with me for some reason. Luckily, I was reading in my childhood long before I stumbled across books like Alive and Helter Skelter. But yeah, those are like teenage reading years. But I remember in my childhood, one of the books that made the biggest impact on me has stuck with me my entire life, and may in fact have shaped my life more than any other book, which is odd to say perhaps for a children's book. But it was a book called Harriet the Spy. I think it was published in 1964. We had a lot of children's books in our house, and I devoured them all. I loved reading everything. And Harriet the Spy really resonated with me, and I couldn't tell you why exactly, but it's a story of a young girl in New York, lives in a very multicultural kind of crazy, like low-income apartment building in Brooklyn or someplace in New York. I mean, New York might as well have been in another galaxy, just like California was. But of course, a young girl in New York, I could relate to the story, even though I wasn't familiar with New York or the ethnic stuff going on in the book, because it's basically about this young girl who is a self-proclaimed spy, and she knows ways to climb all around this neighborhood and these apartment buildings where she could look in the windows and spy on her neighbors and sort of get a window into their lives and hear them, and then she would write in a journal all these stories. So she was basically a journal keeper. She kept a journal about her life, and she wrote about her family, her neighbors, and her friends. And the arc of the story was a very powerful one, I thought, in the sense of just learning about all these people, her writing about them, her thoughts about these people and herself and the relationships. And then, of course, came a day when one of her notebooks disappeared, and her friends could read her journal everything that she'd written about them in her private journal. And that was a huge crisis point for her. And that's what kind of drove the story forward. But I was just captivated so much by this idea that I tried to emulate her physically. I sat down and I put together, as a child, I put together my own spy kit, because she had a kit that, like, she would wear things where she had special pockets. Maybe that's where my love of compartments and pockets began, because you had to have notebooks and pens and pencils, and then, just spy tools, flashlights and things, almost like she was Jason Bourne, going out there spying. And I put together my own kit. So I would put together my own little kit, a belt with all kinds of pockets. And I don't know, my entire life, I don't know whether it started before Harriet the Spy or imitating Harriet. I started keeping a journal, but writing and observing and keeping a detailed journal has been a part of my entire life. And it all started, I think, with Harriet the Spy. I could list a dozen other favorite books from my childhood, lots and lots of them, but in terms of the one that affected me the most and kind of had a physical impact on the way I lived, I think I have to mention Harriet the Spy, a classic. And I think when I went to university, then I was introduced, of course, to a whole new world of books. And then I embarked on decades of solid reading and reading and reading. And then these books kind of fell into different categories, like I said. There would be a book that made a big impact on me in the way I lived my life. That's sort of one category. And then there's another category, a book that would open up a whole new world to me. So you just stumble across one book by a certain author, and then you love it, and then you read all the books by that author, and then you branch out to reading the books from their contemporaries, books that are related to that author and to that book. And then you go deeper into the literary world. You follow this branch, and then you stumble across another book that takes you down this branch. So let's start there. I remember a key one for me was The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. That was my first piece of Russian literature. I didn't know about Russian literature until then. And then as soon as I read The Brothers Karamazov, it was like, whoa, Dostoevsky, he's my new guy. And then I would track down all the books I could find by Dostoevsky. And of course, he would lead me to all the books by Tolstoy, and then Solzhenitsyn, and then on and on and on. And then I spent a long time reading all the books from Russian literature. And I can't remember what book in particular. I'm pretty sure it was Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I think it was that book that said, oh, Victorian literature, Victorian England, all the books from that era. And then I just devoured everything I could get, all of the Bronte sisters, Jane Austen, Dickens, on and on and on. So that one book, Pride and Prejudice, had a big impact on me because it opened up that entire world. And I could list so many books that follow that pattern. There was like Sometimes a Great Notion by Ken Kesey. I don't know why. I stumbled across it at one point. It looked like a good book. I didn't know anything about Ken Kesey at all. Anyway, I read Sometimes a Great Notion, blew my mind. And then that led me, of course, to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, all of Ken Kesey's books. And that introduced me to beat culture, because he was part of the Beat generation. And that takes you to Jack Kerouac, On the Road, all the beat poets, on and on and on. So I started with Sometimes a Great Notion, and then that opened up all the books from the Beat generation, from those decades in the United States. So yeah, those are some of the books that had a big impact on me. They did not wreck me emotionally, but they did sort of expand my world, and they would take me down a new branch of literature that I didn't know about before. One book leading to another, one author leading to another, until you sort of read everything in that area. And I could go on to list a whole bunch more similar to that, but there's another category of books that affected how I thought, which had an impact on how I lived. And I think the starting point for all of that was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So that's another one. I talk about it all the time. Robert Pirsig, I think, the author, and the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. For whatever reason, that book just really resonated with me. And there was a lot in there about education, because it was like autobiographical, and he was a professor, and there was a lot in there about studying and students and how you learn. And then the whole book was basically centered on the idea of what is good? Like, how do you define quality? And this has been something that has dominated all of my thinking for much of my life. I think for all of us, it really, when it comes down to it, it's like the key question. Whatever you're thinking about, you're trying to make a decision. What should I do? Or you want to watch a movie. Well, good movies, bad movies. How do you define what is a quality movie? What is a good movie? So that how do you define quality? That was sort of the key concept of the book, and it just sort of resonated with me. But there were many practical lifestyle things in that book. And he talked about learning, for example, and he did this experiment with one of his classes where he would not give them a grade, where he said, okay, nobody gets a grade. And of course, they still had to do tests, they had to write essays, they had to write papers, but he would just hand them back with notes, comments. But nobody got an A, nobody got an F, nobody got 90%, nobody got 40%, no grades. And of course, all the students freaked out, because how do you know whether you're smart unless you're getting good grades? How do you know whether you're learning? How do you feel good about yourself unless you get an A+ and you're smarter? Anyway, it was a complete revolutionary way of thinking. And then in the end, of course, the students discovered that it was wonderful, because they stopped worrying about rote memorization and just repeating what they think the teacher thinks is right. They started thinking for themselves and learning for themselves. So I took this to heart, being an idiot. And then when I was in university, I went to all of my professors and I told them, I don't want to know any of my grades. So whatever papers I hand in, whatever tests I do, you hand them back to me. I asked them as a personal favor to me, don't put a grade on it. I don't want to know what grade I got. And I don't know, I think sometimes when you come across one of these inspirational ideas, it's good to take it as an inspiration, but it's not really a good thing to implement it 100%. That can lead to some bad things. Like I took it so seriously that one year I signed up originally for a Spanish class, but then I decided I don't really want to take Spanish this semester. So I signed up for the class, but I never went. I think I went for a week, maybe 2 weeks. I did one test or something, and then I decided not to go to that class anymore. And a normal person would go to the registrar and drop the class. But I never bothered, because I wasn't worried about my grades. It's like, it doesn't matter, who cares? That's all just record keeping. So on my transcript, like if I ever tried to get a master's degree or whatever, I failed this course. I got like 24% in the Spanish class in university. And at the time, as a idealistic university student, I didn't care. Like I didn't even know what my grades were. I never looked at them, so I didn't care about them. But then, of course, that can have real life consequences, that you failed that badly in university. And it could mean when you apply to get to a master's degree, you might not get in because your transcript is so terrible. It drags down your average, if you see what I mean. But I love that idea so much that I acted on it. And then he had other very practical ideas I talk about all the time. Even in my Planet Doug videos, I've mentioned them, where when it comes to doing something physically challenging, like riding a bicycle or hiking up a mountain, his thoughts were all about focusing on the process and the moment. That if you're thinking about, this is a difficult thing, you have to get out of the way, like you're goal oriented, you gotta get to the top of the mountain, then the climbing just becomes a painful experience. And I adopted this philosophy where, no, you don't even think about that. You concentrate on your breathing, one foot going in front of the other, looking around you, absorbing where you are, listening to what is around you. And that gets into cycling as well, which is why I have such a hard time when I'm watching a cycling travel video or reading a travel book or a YouTube video of any kind where they're on the bike and it's like, what a horrible day. This is awful. Oh, it's 80 kilometers to go. Oh, I can't wait until we get there. Because their thinking is all wrong. They're trying to get the cycling over with, or they avoid the mountains because, I can't wait till we get to the top. They hate climbing up the mountain, and then when they go coasting down the other side, now they're happy. And then Robert Pirsig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance would say, no, you're thinking about it all wrong. You're feeling about it all wrong. Just settle into a groove. It's all the same thing. Just ride the bike up the mountain, and you kind of have to have the proper gear for it, so you can drop down into a lower gear. Just keep your cadence steady and just slowly climb up to the top. And if it takes you 6 hours of climbing, enjoy those 6 hours. So that was a practical thing I adopted in my life. And he also did something about, like a lot about motorcycle maintenance, practical advice. So when you're dismantling something, the state of mind you need to do it and staying organized, where you remember where all the pieces come from, and then you lay them out on a white sheet or a white piece of paper and keep them organized. And if you're trying to do something and you get really, really frustrated, you feel yourself stressed out, walk away, stop. Like, don't keep fighting it. If the motorcycle is fighting you, you're trying to fix something and you can't get this bolt off and you're about to lose your mind and start hitting it with a hammer, just take a breath, get up, walk away. Just leave it for a day, come back tomorrow. And I've adopted that all the time, where I start off even before you do the work. Like if you're riding your bicycle and you get a flat tire, most people will react negatively, like, flat tire, because it interferes with their day. So in my case, if I've ever had a flat tire on the bike, the first thing I do is just calm myself mentally. Like I just stop, take a deep breath, and it's like, okay, I'm going to be at the side of the road for an hour fixing this flat tire. Let's just incorporate it into our day. It's part of the day. Enjoy the process and get it done, and then sort of move on. If you feel yourself getting frustrated or stressed out, just walk away from it, have a drink, go for a little stroll, close your eyes, relax for a while, read a book, and then go back to work again, things like that. So anyway, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance had a huge impact on my life in terms of actual living and how you think about things. Another one that jumped into my mind when I was thinking about this was Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Americans probably know this book quite well. It's a classic piece of American literature from 1854, and it is a journal. Again, I'm fascinated by journals, starting with Harriet the Spy. And Henry David Thoreau decided to live a simple life. He basically went to a cabin beside a pond, and he wanted to not cut himself off from society, but I guess even in 1854, society was too much. I mean, Henry David Thoreau would have a heart attack if he was alive in the day of social media and the internet and smartphones. He would freak out. But back then, even 1854, United States was too much for him to handle. And he retreated into the woods, growing his own food, being a little bit of a naturalist, keeping detailed notes about the animal life, habits of the animals and the plants, planting food, things like that. And I remember reading this book and sort of admiring it. So in terms of the theme, it says that he advocates for a minimalist lifestyle, rejecting materialism to focus on essentials. The book celebrates the beauty and spiritual value of the natural world, urging readers to connect with it. So he questions consumerism, industrialization, conformity, and proposing that you can just live your own, make your own choices about how to live. And he chose this. It was a 2-year experiment, living in a small cabin. And in my life, I've had many, many opportunities to emulate that. And I seem to lean into it a little bit. I'm certainly nowhere near the extremes of what he did. But I remember like I had a time in my life when I was living in a cabin, exactly like that cabin in the Rocky Mountains in British Columbia. Because I was there working summer jobs, and I was living in this very simple cabin. And you find a copy of Walden, and you sit there. I'm reading by kerosene, because I had a kerosene lantern, and then there was no bathroom there. In order to take a shower, you have to go down to the river, take a swim in the river, and it's an outhouse in the back. And then you're sitting there reading Walden. And then I remember periods of time like that in my life, because they also took me down literary branches again. Because I remember when I was living in that cabin, pretending that I was Henry David Thoreau, I even tried to, I was such a dummy. The thing is, I love these ideas, and I like to embrace them, but then I'm horrible at physical implementation because I'm such a dummy. I remember I had this idea that I wanted to grow all of my own vegetables, but I wanted to have those vegetables for the rest of the year, because I was going to go back to university in the fall, back in Ontario. But I was in British Columbia working for the summer, living in this cabin. And for some reason, I thought I could do it, that I could plant this huge vegetable garden, harvest all kinds of broccoli and cauliflower and peas and beans, and somehow I was going to preserve all of it and ship it all to Ontario and have all of my own fresh vegetables for the rest of the year. But of course, it's easy to plant all the vegetables, and you can grow vegetables, and I went that far. I made this huge garden and planted and did all this stuff. But then when it came to, well, how are you going to get all these vegetables to Ontario and they're not going to rot on you? I mean, it was physically beyond me and impossible, and it would have been hugely expensive. So the whole project was kind of silly, but it started in a good place, I guess. But I remember I went back to the same place to work 2 or 3 different times, and on each time I was doing a ton of reading, because most of the time I was living by myself in this cabin, working during the day, and then I would have weekends and nights to myself, and all I did was read. And I would do something like, I discovered Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. It was just in a bookstore somewhere, and I'd never heard of Kurt Vonnegut, whatever. I read Slaughterhouse-Five, blew my mind, and then I'm like reading every single book I can find by Vonnegut. I read his entire library. So Slaughterhouse-Five is another book in my life that had a big impact. Cannery Row I read Cannery Row by John Steinbeck, and that was like again, it really appealed to me, the ideas in Cannery Row, the characters, and that led me to the entire world of John Steinbeck, reading every book I could get my hands on written by Steinbeck. So if I made a list of books that had an impact on me, those would make the list. Cannery Row, Slaughterhouse-Five, books like that as well. Going back to high school now, one of the assigned books for English class was Lord of the Flies, and that was like catnip for me. Blew my mind, Lord of the Flies. I've read it so many times in my life, just over and over and over, every time. And I think it appeals to me because of what it says about human nature, and of course it's also a survival story. What happens, just like the book Alive, this team, all the people on this plane crash. Now they have to form a society, a group, isolated from the world. What happens? Do they divide into fighting? Like, what happens? In Lord of the Flies, of course, they descend into armed camps that fight each other. So yeah, Lord of the Flies had a huge impact on me, and again, part of a survival story. And yeah, so I think a lot about what would happen if someone were isolated on an island all by themselves, things like that. As an entry point into Canadian literature, I actually have 3 books that had a big impact on me. The first one, oddly enough, was back when I was reading books like Alive and Helter Skelter. For some reason, my mother had a copy of The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence, very well-known Canadian writer. And that kind of blew my mind, because back when I was quite young at that time, I wasn't ready for The Diviners. I really wasn't. So I kind of read that book. I was like, whoa, it had a big impact on me. But that didn't lead me into Canadian literature really, but that was my introduction into it. My real introduction came with, I think, Timothy Findley's The Wars. And I don't know when or how I stumbled across it, but I read this book called The Wars by Timothy Findley, and it blew my mind. It's the story of a Canadian soldier in World War I. Again, kind of a memoir. I'm drawn to journals and memoirs, things like that. And then, of course, I just did a deep dive into all of Tim Findley's books. I read everything by him. And then that kind of opened up the world of Canadian literature. And I think the other book that really opened up that world to me was by Mordecai Richler, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And that book blew my mind. It was sort of like expanding my world in Canada, because that book is based in Montreal, in the Jewish community, and that opened up a whole new world for me, things that I didn't know about. So then I found myself reading Robertson Davies, the Deptford trilogy. That really blew my mind. And then all the books by Margaret Lawrence, Margaret Atwood, Michael Ondaatje. But I think it all started with Timothy Findley's The Wars, and then that led me to all of Canadian literature. So I think I'll end my book discussion there. So short answer, none of these books wrecked me emotionally, and these aren't necessarily my favorite books. Man, if I started making a list of my favorite books, I'd be here all day long. But these are books I can think of right now that had an impact on me. It did impact me in terms of how I think about the world, how I live my life, and had an emotional impact. They didn't wreck me emotionally, didn't make me sad. Most of these books inspired me and gave me tools to think about life and the world and how to live, basically. Movies, yeah, same story. Nothing ever wrecked me emotionally. They might affect me emotionally a little bit. But there are a lot of movies I remember that had a big impact on me. And they fall into the same categories as the books. There are certain movies that I just sort of stumbled across in weird situations, and then they just hit like a ton of bricks, hit like a freight train for some reason. And there are other movies that had a big impact on me. I thought they were amazing, but then they introduced me to an entire world of movies, and then I'd go down that pathway and discover an entire world of cinema that I didn't know about. And so I could probably think of a bunch of movies that were like a keystone that introduced me to more movies, and other movies that just sort of had an impact on how I live. And when I started thinking about this, one that jumped into my head immediately was Koyaanisqatsi. And again, this is going way, way back. I think I have notes. When was it? Oh, it was in 1982. And I believe I saw it my first year of university when I was in London, Ontario. And there were like midnight screenings and 2 a.m. screenings of movies at repertory cinemas. You could go there and very, very cheap, $1, $2, you can go in and just sit in the theater for hours and watching these movies that were they're not in theaters anymore. But anyway, I went to a screening. I didn't know what it was, never heard of it before. I just wanted to go see a movie, and I sat down in the theater. I didn't even know how to say it. I saw the poster. I don't even know what that is. These repertory cinemas would put out like a monthly calendar, and that was like Christmas Day for me. You get one of these calendars, and you can see every day all the movies they're showing, none of which I had ever heard of. So I sat there in the dark and Koyaanisqatsi started playing. A couple hours later, I emerged into the real world at 2 or 3 in the morning, empty streets, and my mind, I was just like, yeah, like someone hit me in the head with a baseball bat, because Koyaanisqatsi was revolutionary in its time. It was made in the days when like slow motion and fast motion photography was a brand new thing. You couldn't, like I could do it with my smartphone right now. I can do a hyperlapse, time lapse, like time-lapse photography. You had to have special gear to do it. It was very impressive technology. And then Koyaanisqatsi took a look at the world, mainly the industrial, urban world, and sped it up to show you what it looks like. It's like you take something that looks very ordinary, like cars driving down the street, and then you speed it up so it's going 100 times speed. You see it in a brand new way. It's like, whoa, that is so weird. You go into a factory, crowds on a sidewalk going in and out of subway cars. Anything like that, you speed it up and you see it in a new light. And it added the music of Philip Glass, which I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of Philip Glass before. I never knew about his music. And suddenly, I was seeing the whole world in a new light. And then I was, dove into the music of Philip Glass. So Koyaanisqatsi had a big impact on my life. The way you view cities and urban living, and you see the patterns there. People living a pattern that they don't even know they're living. Like everybody thinks they're an individual doing something unique and special. I'm living my own vibrant, rich life. But you speed it up, and no, you're doing exactly the same thing that everybody else around you is doing. Like you're suddenly in an ant colony. And I don't think that led to me kind of breaking away from that pattern a little bit. I don't think I've never been pulled into that kind of a life. Like it's something that happens naturally, I think, where if you find yourself on a path that brings you to a job that you end up keeping for a long time, you naturally end up buying a house and getting a car, and then you establish a very nice routine for your life. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But then again, if you took a camera and filmed it at high speed, well, yeah, now you see the pattern, right? 5 days a week, drive to work all day, drive home, watch TV, drive, weekend, do this. And then you would see it repeated, like you're in an ant colony doing everything everyone else is doing. I could easily have lived that life, I think. I just wasn't smart enough to do it. So I never found the job that was satisfying. I never had that opportunity or the ability to think for myself and get a good job that I enjoy, that gave me a good income, that allowed me to do all these things, buy a house, buy a car, settle down, and live a good life. I just never stumbled into that. I stumbled to South Korea to get a job teaching English, and then I never recovered from that stumble, which eventually led to me sitting here talking to you. So, but yeah, maybe it all started with Koyaanisqatsi. But yeah, I never stopped thinking about that movie. By modern standards, maybe it's not that impressive anymore, because it all looks pretty normal now. We've all seen it. I could do it right now. I have done it when I was in Dhaka in Bangladesh. I was fascinated by the traffic flow, and I recorded my own time lapses at these very busy intersections. And I put them on my YouTube channel, and I remember thinking at the time, man, these time lapses are amazing. It's gonna get 1 million views on YouTube. Look at that, that's incredible. And of course, 2 people to date probably have watched those time lapses, but I thought they were pretty amazing. I love time lapses, and I would shoot them constantly if I could, right? But anyway, and then he went on to make Koyaanisqatsi, where he did everything in slow motion. So Koyaanisqatsi was high speed, and then Koyaanisqatsi, he went all the way around the world and filmed other countries in slow motion, equally mind-blowing. But it was Koyaanisqatsi that I encountered first that had a big impact on me. Going all the way back to high school, having an emotional impact on me. Oddly enough, there was a film. I had to look up the name of it because I remember it so clearly, but every time I try to think of it, I can never remember the name. It's called Culloden. So it's from 1970s, and it is kind of a 1964. Yeah, Culloden from 1964, directed by Peter Watkins. And Culloden is what they call a docudrama that recreates the Battle of Culloden, which happened in 1746, and it is the final confrontation between the Jacobite Scottish Highlanders, led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, against the English army, and they were defeated. And this was shown probably in either history class or English class. And you got to remember, this was back in the 70s, and I hadn't seen anything yet. None of us had. This was not the modern era where we're accustomed to violence, because Culloden was really graphic for that time. The war was portrayed realistically, with people being killed physically and graphically, blood and guts and all of that, and it blew our minds. And Culloden has just stuck with me ever since. So that had a powerful emotional impact on me. I think the violence in Culloden by today is quite tame. We see it in sitcoms. Like Rick and Morty has far more violence than Culloden ever had, but it was my first exposure to that kind of graphic violence. I'd never seen anything like it before in my life, and it was just like really had an impact. Yeah, Culloden. And the other one from that time was Apocalypse Now. One of my English teachers, based on, of course, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I believe we were reading Heart of Darkness, and Apocalypse Now was based on. So he kind of went outside the curriculum. I don't think the school would have allowed him to do it in class, but I think he said, okay, anyone that wants to watch Apocalypse Now, I'm going to be showing it during lunch periods. Though he may have shown it in class as well. I have a hazy memory. But maybe he showed it to all his English classes and at lunchtime. But because it's such a long movie, he had to show it in pieces. And it blew my mind, so that I would go to every lunch period where he was screening it, every English class where he was showing it, and I just watched it over and over and over. I watched it as many times as I could. I didn't care whether I saw the same 40 minutes chunk, over and over and over again. And Apocalypse Now has really stuck with me my entire life. When I was in London going to this repertory cinema, they showed the extended cut of Apocalypse Now at like a midnight showing, and then I went there and sat through it, and just every single time. And again, I think part of what appeals to me is it's also a journal, because the soldier, the assassin who goes to kill Kurtz, he tells the story. He's narrating the story, and I'm a real sucker for narration and journal keeping and recording videos to tell the story of what you're doing. And Apocalypse Now also had a big impact on me. And then there are the movies that I mentioned that would take me down a branch of cinema history, and I could go on and on about those. I can't really, because it would take too long. But I'm thinking of something like Aguirre, The Wrath of God, by Werner Herzog. I mean, wow. If you've never seen anything like that before in your life, the first time you see that movie and you're open to it, that style, it really blows your mind. And then it's sort of like, whoa, there's other movies out there other than standard Beverly Hills Cop or something like that. You find a movie like Aguirre, Wrath of God, or Fanny and Alexander, and then it's like, whoa, look at that. There's other movies. And then you go down the Werner Herzog rabbit hole, watch all of his movies, et cetera, et cetera. And there's so many of those, movies that introduced me to the classics, African Queen, Humphrey Bogart, all the movies from that era. I think I started that era with The African Queen, either The African Queen or Casablanca. You're looking at, the 100 best movies of all time. they always say, oh, you got to watch The African Queen or Casablanca. So I watched one of those, and then it was like, whoa. And then you watch all the movies by that director from that time period. Yeah, I could go on. And yeah, I think I'll just end it there so I don't talk about movies all day long. So, Daryl from WanderEats, yeah. Those are some of the books, some of the movies. Maybe I'll end it with a documentary that really jumps out at me right now. Is the one that I saw, and I've talked about it before. Before I went to Cambodia, I was doing a lot of reading. I remember The Killing Fields, that movie, really having an impact on me. And the killing fields in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge. And before I went to Cambodia on a cycling trip, I found a documentary about the school. I forget the name of it right now, but there was that school in Phnom Penh that was converted to a prison where they tortured people to get them to confess to crimes. And then once they confessed, they took them out into the countryside and then killed them all. And you can go see that school now that was used as a prison by the Khmer Rouge. And I knew I was going to go there, and I found this documentary where they found a guard from that prison and a prisoner who was still alive, and they interviewed each of them and then put them in a room together. And this is something that has always fascinated me. And I guess there's an emotional reaction to it because I've studied a lot of politics. When I was in university, if I had a specialty, my specialty was the revolutionary movements in Central and South America. I was fascinated by guerrilla groups that would live in the jungle and fight against the army. And of course, that would lead you into stories about the government and the army and the secret police taking prisoners and then putting them into prisons and torturing them. So I come across a lot of these sort of stories like that, and I'm always fascinated by the people that do the torturing, like going all the way back to even books like 1984, all the torture that's in 1984, and I always think about that person. What is going on in their head? Like, I can identify with the person being tortured. Most of the time they didn't do anything wrong, they just got arrested and now they're being tortured. But the person doing the torturing, the guards, the administrators of the prison camp, like, what goes on in their head? Like, they go to work every day, they clock in, and now, okay, we torture all day, then we clock out, then we go home again, and we have dinner with our wife and we play with our children. Like, I don't understand the brain, the person, the mind. It feels like I'm missing something. So every time I find one of these stories, I'm all in. I'm emotionally invested. And this documentary about this school prison run by the Khmer Rouge, where the prison guard, like, does the prison guard think he's doing the right thing? Like, does he think he's the good guy and the prisoner is the bad guy, and the torture is justified because the end justifies the means? Okay, torturing this person is not a good thing, but we're getting information from him that will help us stop the revolution and stop the bad people. Like, does the torturer think they're the good guy? This topic goes around in my mind all the time. So this documentary, and it was fascinating, and it had an emotional impact on me. So last one I'll talk about, but those are some of the books, some of the movies, documentaries that had an impact on my life emotionally and in reality, I guess. I think I allowed myself to talk so long about the last question because I think the remaining three will be a little bit easier to answer. We'll see. Rai, R-A-I, asks, "Hi Doug, you seem to have made Kuala Lumpur your base of operations over the past few years. What is it about KL that stands out to you compared to other Southeast Asian cities you've spent time in? What keeps drawing you back?" Short answer is convenience for my lifestyle and the things I've wanted to do lately. and kind of poor planning in a way. That has sort of kept me there, because I would be in Kuala Lumpur and I want to get something done, and then my visa expires, so I decide to go on a trip and I go to Sumatra for a while. And then now that my time in Sumatra is over, instead of going to a new place, I go back to KL, because I haven't finished whatever it was I was trying to do in KL, and I never quite wrapped things up in my life. Like, a lot of it is connected with YouTube, to be honest, because I don't know, I think I kept waiting for a light bulb to go off in my YouTube endeavors, that I'm finally going to get this figured out, fall into a rhythm. I've got everything worked out. I know what I'm doing with YouTube, because I want to document my life and document traveling. But it felt like I never really found my groove, found a rhythm. And I kept thinking, well, if I ever finally get it all together, finally now I can continue my YouTube journey for real, and then I can go to here and here and here and here and here and here and here, and just sort of become a traveler making YouTube videos. But I never made money on YouTube, so that was always a block. My videos never became popular. I never found the groove to do that, to elevate to the next level. So that kind of, from a circumstantial perspective, that kept me going back to KL. But on the other side, I really love KL, and the things that I like about it that make it convenient, it's a transportation hub. You start from KL, you go to Bangladesh, AirAsia, whatever airline, back to KL. Thailand, you got a border crossing. You can fly easily back to KL. Sumatra, back to KL. It's a very convenient transportation hub. So, and then within Kuala Lumpur itself, there's lots to do in the city for me. I love the history, the museums, the food, going out to the night markets. If I'm wanting to make a video for YouTube about something there's always something for me to go out and explore, to do. It's like I could expand my world in KL more and more and more. The fact that people speak English makes life more convenient. If I need to buy something for my bicycle or get my camera fixed or do something like that, KL is a good place to do it. The MRT system is a huge one. Once I started using it, it's just like you can go anywhere you want in the city by LRT, by MRT, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. I love that about the city. It makes it a great place to live. And I started to get to know people like Daryl, Matthew, other people that I got to know through my YouTube channel. So I had a little bit of a community there. I probably know more people in Taiwan than anywhere in the world. Second to that, probably Kuala Lumpur or Malaysia at this point, and then Canada. I guess I know a lot of people in Canada, but I'm just out of touch with them. So yeah, it's kind of a social base for me as well, Kuala Lumpur. And then you have the boat, the Indomal fast ferry that goes to Sumatra and back. I started off going out of Port Klang. My very first trips, I went from Port Klang to Sumatra by boat. And that was before I even knew about YouTube. Wasn't even making YouTube videos back then. I just had a website. And then I was going in and out of Sumatra. And then of course Malaysia has a very generous visa policy for most foreigners, 90-day entry stamp. And for me, that's like catnip. I remember I spent years, before I was based in Malaysia, I was based in the Philippines. And I spent years in the Philippines because they also, I wouldn't call it generous, but they allowed you to extend your tourist visa inside the country. You didn't have to leave. You start with a 60-day tourist visa, and then you can extend it for another 60 days, and then another 60, up until like 2.5 years. And I maxed out that process before I finally had to leave the Philippines physically. So that kind of keeps me in a country. So yeah, that's basically the story of Malaysia. Highly developed MRT system, ease of communication, very advanced economy, and like electronics markets, camera stores, fixing my bicycle originally, cameras later on, and the fact that it's a very convenient transportation hub, flights, trains. When I first went there, I was always taking trains and buses to Singapore. So I was getting like a visa, going on a visa run. I took the train down to Singapore, stayed there for a while, came back, took the bus to Singapore, came back. So you got land border crossings, boat entry and exit, flights entry and exit. Yeah, it's a great place. Oh boy, Heiko, he asks, what is the technical device or devices that you want or need most at the moment? All the best from Munich, Germany. Well, yeah, that's a fun question. Yeah, I suppose I have a lot of things I could talk about there, but I think there are two basic items that I've been thinking about forever, for a long, well, okay, call it three. There's three categories of items that if you asked me right now and said, okay, here's a store where you can get anything you want that would make your life better as a YouTuber, if you're making YouTube videos, and I could go in there, pick out like three items, because I think in the world of making YouTube videos, I think there's like three basic categories of camera gear, basically. And then I would start with, I think right now, honestly, a drone. I mean, I've been thinking about, you look at all the best, most popular YouTube travel vloggers, a key element of all their videos today is drone footage. And I've talked about this in the past. I was never a big fan of drone footage because my perspective is more grounded, where I like to tell the story the way it really is, as opposed to a romanticized version, because when you fly a drone, you see the world in a new way, a gorgeous, amazing, informative way, but you don't see it yourself. So even here in Tanjung Balai, if I walk outside my door right now and take video, you're going to see what the world is exactly like, and you can make a judgment call whether you want to come to Tanjung Balai or not. And it's like, whoa, it's so hot, it's so crowded, it's so busy, it's this, it's that. You see it as it really is, the good and the bad from the point of view of being a foreigner. I fly a drone, I go down to the river where all the fishing boats are and I fly a drone, you're gonna look at that video and go, wow, Tanjung Balai is amazing, it's beautiful. I mean, everywhere is beautiful from the air. So that's what makes drone video so amazing. So if I've ever felt a little bit, not embarrassed, but like, I'm sorry I don't have drone footage in my videos, my argument would be, well, even if you come here on your own, that's not what you're going to see anyway, so it's a little bit of a cheat. But there's no question that drone footage is amazing. And in my life, I love seeing things from up high. So if I'm ever in an area and there's a building and I can get onto the roof, I'm going to the roof. So I'm climbing to the roof and then you see the whole city. It's like, wow, now it looks amazing. Or if there's a nearby hill or a mountain, I'm hopping on my scooter and I'm going to the top of the mountain because it looks amazing. So I do have this built-in reaction, like I love seeing things from up high. So a drone, if you had to talk about a shooting video toolkit, I think a drone would be an amazing tool to have. And the good thing right now is there seems to be a front runner. Like, it wouldn't be a difficult choice right now, because in the past it would be like, even if you wanted to buy a drone, well, which one? Oh, you have to do a lot of thinking, like, oh, and then by the time you come up with one, it would be quite expensive. Drones are not cheap, obviously. But these days, there seems to be one on the market right now that they really hit the sweet spot. I've been doing a lot of research, but it is the DJI Mini 4K, the Mini 4K. As far as I can tell, like I'm talking about a budget drone, like a low budget, not the high end. I don't need high end for this sort of thing. But it seems like for a low budget, entry level drone, for someone like me, the DJI Mini 4K seems to hit the sweet spot. So that would be the you want or need the most at the moment. That would be on my list. The next, of course, would be a camera that is better in low light. I'm not a big nighttime guy, I'm not a big low light shooting guy, but lately I do find myself shooting in a lot of low light conditions, and every time I do that with my current GoPros, which is the only cameras I have with me right now, it looks pretty terrible. GoPros have not instituted low light capability yet. So if you want an action camera, which I do, I still find the action camera is the best vlogging camera, something that is better in low light. And then you're looking at like the DJI Action 5 Pro, Insta360 Ace Pro 2, I guess. Something like that would be nice to have, I think, at this point. I'm kind of a GoPro guy. I think GoPros are great cameras. I like the video quality, at least I have over the past, especially with the Hero 12 and the 13, and I assume with the upcoming 14. They've ironed out the glitches. They don't glitch as much. They don't glitch at all anymore. They still overheat. So the Hero 12, it has been a problem because it just overheats all the time, which I wasn't expecting. So a different brand of action camera. At this point, even a dedicated GoPro guy like myself, I kind of gotta admit there are better alternatives out there. Even if I like the GoPro video a little bit better than what I see from the DJI Action, the Action has to win out in the end. Yeah. So yeah, a better action camera in low light, probably the Action 5 Pro. I'm intrigued by the Insta360 Ace Pro 2, but I do have a habit of going against the grain. Like, I like having the thing that other people don't have, and that often works against me. So I'm sort of attracted to the Ace Pro 2 because of its unique nature. I do like the flip-up screen, and I don't know, there are things about it that stand out to me, but it kind of feels like there might be a lot of gotcha things about it, and that the Action 4 and the Action 5 are more proven technologies. And this year, I think the DJI is going to come out with the Action 6. There's a lot of chatter out there that the Action 6 is on its way, because something weird happened in DJI land, I think, where the Action 4 Pro really hit a sweet spot. People just love that camera. And then the Action 5 Pro, everybody was hoping would improve on it, keep everything that's good about the 4, but add a couple of new features. And they did, but somehow they screwed up the video quality. Most people say that they still prefer the video quality of the 4, that with the 5, they added this HDR push to the standard video mode. So the standard video mode is much better, people say, in the 4 than the 5. So they made a better camera in the 5, but they ruined the video quality a little bit. So everybody's hoping that now with the 6, they're going to combine the best of both worlds, and the 6 is going to be the ultimate DJI action camera. Get back to the best video quality, best battery life, no overheating, low light capability. So it's going to be the ultimate. So that could be the camera of the future for Planet Doug, the DJI Action 6, but we have to wait until it comes onto the market, I guess. It's not out there right now. Third category is just a mid-range camera, like a real camera, as opposed to an action camera. And there I'm a little bit at a loss. I've been waiting for years for a really, really good like APS-C sensor a good vlogging camera, put it that way. You can have an action camera, which for me is the best because it's small, it's lightweight, it's durable. You can put it on a bicycle, you can put it on a scooter, you can hold it in your hand. It covers all the bases. And it's got perfect stabilization, and it can be good in low light. And it's wide angle. So the action camera is still the best vlogging camera. But video from a real camera looks better and has a lot, like for close-ups, so anyway, you should have an action camera and you should have a vlogging camera. And I've always wanted to buy a good vlogging camera, but I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And up until today, there just isn't one on the market that suits yet. I mean, we're still looking at the same usual suspects, right? From Sony, you've got the ZV-1 Mark II. That's the 1-inch sensor. And then you've got the Sony ZV-E10. That's the APC. But of course, then you've got the full frame, I think the E1, and that's kind of off the table for me because it's full frame. I don't need that. It's too big. It's too expensive. So from Sony, that's what you've got. Those are their vlogging cameras. The ZV-1 Mark II, the ZV-E10. I think there's a Mark II, right? And I mean, if someone said you can go into this magical store and pick out a camera, well, I'd probably walk out with one of those. They're not perfect, but they're probably good enough. But they all have problems. So when it came to me taking the limited money that I have, I couldn't talk myself into spending that much money on another camera because I kept waiting for a better vlogging camera. And then Sony, every time they came out with a new version, they just made it worse than the previous one. They just never quite got it right. But it would be one of those. The ZV-1 Mark II, the ZV-E10 Mark II, with a wide lens. Probably the ZV-E10 Mark II. Canon came out with a vlogging camera, and I was really excited about that one. APS-C, they call it the PowerShot V1. But from what I can see, they didn't get it right. Stabilization isn't good enough, and I see all these videos on YouTube where YouTubers are raving about how amazing it is, and yet the video from it to me looks terrible. It looks dim, it looks dark, it looks fuzzy. It doesn't look good at all. So there's nothing about the Canon PowerShot V1 that intrigues me. I was really looking forward to it because it was supposed to have a wide lens, amazing stabilization. It looked like Canon on paper figured it out. They really knew what they were supposed to do, but they just did not manage to execute it in real life, as far as I can tell. So back to Sony. And you really can't go wrong with Sony. Sony optics, Sony autofocus, best in the business, I think. Sony video looks amazing, and the autofocus looks amazing. So I think all roads tend to lead back to Sony for a vlogging camera. Of course, we have the outlier, which is the DJI Pocket 3. And who knows, for me, had I picked up a Pocket 3 when it came out, perhaps I would have found it was the best camera I ever had. And it has so many amazing qualities, it really does. And one of the things I like the best about it that I never stopped thinking about, I tested it, like Daryl, he has the Pocket 3, and I borrowed it from him for a couple of days to test it out. And every time we tested, the thing that amazed me about that camera, it has all the other, again, it has amazing stabilization. We all know that, on and on and on. We know the good things about it. But something that a lot of people don't talk about is how it treats exposure for light changes. I've never seen a camera adjust for light as well as the Pocket 3 does. To me, that is its secret weapon. It was amazing. So I'd be sitting inside a Starbucks in dim lighting shooting with the Pocket 3. Looks amazing. It adjusts for the interior lighting. You start aiming it out the window, perfect exposure. You go outside into the bright sunlight, perfect exposure. Like everywhere you went, it adjusted and gave what to my eyes, was the perfect exposure. And I've never seen any other camera do that. I don't know what magical thing they did. Like even these Sonys, the ZV-E10 and the E1, the ZV, I hate the Sony names, the Sony ZV-1 and the E10. When I watch sample video from them, it just does not handle the same range of exposures. It does really well in some situations, not so well in others, and going from one to the other. Nothing compares to what the Pocket 3 can do. I ended up deciding I couldn't be happy with the Pocket 3, mainly because the way I shoot video, the biggest problem with it is that it has the exposed gimbal. And then what I do is I just walk around holding the camera in my hand all day long. So when I'm shooting with the GoPro, I hold the GoPro. Like if I'm walking and I'm not shooting video, I'm still holding it. It's in my hand. I'm swinging it back and forth, and then, oh, I want to shoot video. I just raise it up, hit record, or point it this way. So it's always dangling at my waist or dangling from my pocket or something like that. And I couldn't do that with the Pocket 3. I borrowed Daryl's and I tried to shoot the way I normally do. I went out into the MRT system, I went walking around, and the whole time I was holding the Pocket 3 like it was a stick of dynamite. I have to hold it up here all the time. I can't dangle it at my waist and have it swinging around because it's going to hit something. And with the GoPro, you can just leave it on. You don't have to turn it off. It just goes to sleep. The screens turn off, and it's no big deal. But with the Pocket 3, the gimbal is always trying to level out. It's always turning. It's always, however you hold the camera, the gimbal is moving up and down and trying to adjust. And if you're holding the Pocket 3 sideways, dangling it at your waist, you can hear the gimbal, the motors, it's fighting because it's trying to, orient itself properly. The whole time you can hear the motors burning themselves out. So every single time you have to turn the camera off and on. And then every single time you stop filming, you've got to put it away. You got to put it back in the case to protect the gimbal. So basically the Pocket 3 ends up in your pocket, and it stays in your pocket because it's too much trouble to get it out. And I couldn't get past that problem for me. People that I see that shoot with the Pocket 3 that use it all the time, they're almost always static. So, and the camera pushes them into that type of shooting video. So they're shooting in a restaurant. They walk to the restaurant, they sit down, they order their breakfast, they get their coffee, they mount the camera on a little tripod, and then they talk about their breakfast or whatever they're doing. But they're not filming while they're walking there, they're not filming in the bus, they're not filming in the train, they're not filming on the crowded sidewalks because the Pocket 3, it's hard, it's fragile and you're going to break it. Anyway, so those are my thoughts. Maybe I went on, I think Heiko was looking for a simpler answer than that, rather than a long essay about camera gear. The short answer to Heiko's question is, like right now, it would be it would be the DJI Mini 4K drone, or the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, and the DJI Action 6 coming out later those year. Those would be the 3 items that I would get right now if I had the opportunity, I think. But don't quote me on that. I need to do the research. Last question from Rai, R-A-I. Hi, Doug. After seeing so many places and meeting so many people, do you find yourself drawn more to the landscapes or the stories? What tends to leave a bigger impact on you, the place itself or the people you meet there? Bit of a complicated question. I guess the first part is drawn more to the landscapes or the stories. But then the second half is the place itself or the people. So I'm not quite sure what the stories are. Like my stories, the travel stories, the stories people tell me. It's probably like travel stories, right? But an answer to that question would probably depend on the time of my life, because it's changed a lot. At the beginning, like my original trips, and then when I went to South Korea to teach English, like living in South Korea and then doing little backpacking trips, that whole era was kind of my first exposure to new countries, going to new countries for the very first time, traveling for the very first time. And back in those days, as a backpacker, my world was dominated by other backpackers. So that is what stuck with me the most. So when I was living in South Korea, my social life, my world was built around the other English teachers from Australia, from the UK, from Canada, from the United States. There were hundreds of people there, backpackers, travelers, professional English teachers, all living and working in Korea as English teachers. And I lived in that foreign community because I was living in these cheap budget hostels, and every room in the hostel would be occupied by another foreigner like me, and we were all there working and living there. And those are my memories more so. I mean, Korea, man, anybody that goes to Korea, you're going to remember the country. You're going to remember the landscape. You're going to remember the people there. It is an amazing place. Like, it stands out in the world for me as it's an unusual country. The people are unusual. The landscape is. Everything about that country is kind of wonky in a way. It's unique on the planet. I think I'm not saying that just because I went there. It's a special place. And there are certain countries in the world that just have a unique quality to them. And South Korea is one of them. So I do remember the South Korean people, the culture, the food, the landscape, the urban landscape. I remember all of that. But the other foreigners were a big part of my life. And then when I went backpacking, it was my very first time to do it. And you arrive in a new city. And back in those days, everybody had a Lonely Planet guidebook. And then you're on a low budget, you go to the hotel recommendations, and the Lonely Planet says, the best low budget hotel in town is, and it tells you, and everybody goes to that place. So it's packed with other backpackers from Sweden, from Finland, from Norway, from Scotland, from Greece, from Spain, from Italy, from Germany. And I had never met anybody from any of those countries before. Like non-English speaking countries. In Korea, of course, I met Australians and Americans and Brits, but I'd never hung out with Swedish people, Finnish people, Germans, Italians, Greeks, Spaniards. These were all brand new to me. So my world was dominated by the fun and the excitement of meeting people from Europe that I'd never met before. And so I have very strong memories of that. And then as you backpacked around Southeast Asia, you tend to go to the same places because, again, you're following the Lonely Planet guide and you're following just natural geography. You go from this country to that country, from this city to that city, and everybody else is doing exactly the same thing. The backpacker trail, the banana pancake trail. And then you end up running into the same people again and again. You meet them in China, you separate, and then a month later you run into all the same people again on Boracay in the Philippines, because everybody's kind of going to the same places. So from my backpacking days, I was seeing all these countries for the first time, but I think I was so inexperienced that it was difficult for me to really appreciate those countries. They were more of a backdrop, an exciting backdrop, but they were a backdrop to my hanging out with all the other backpackers. Skip ahead to more modern times, like my big cycling trip in Ethiopia, going to Guinea, living in Taiwan, and then traveling around in my YouTube era. All of that I've pretty much done by myself, and over time I've learned a lot more about how to engage with the local country. And I think riding a bicycle helps to a certain extent. Shooting YouTube videos helps with that. So now for me, it's all more about the local country, because I never meet any other foreigners. I don't know where they are anymore. I don't run into them. And even when you're in a place where there are other foreigners, people don't travel in the same way. They're not following the Lonely Planet guidebook anymore. Everybody's doing their own thing with whatever information they get from the internet. Everybody's traveling as part of a couple. You can't really get to know a couple because they live in their own isolated little bubble. The individual traveler, like myself, seems to be an endangered species. I don't run into them. And if they're out there, they're doing what I'm doing. They're riding on a motorcycle, they're riding on a scooter, and they're off in their own worlds, and you don't meet them, you don't run into them. So these days, it's about the people that I meet, the neighborhoods, not really landscapes, yeah. Every time I try to say it's one or the other, I think of the other, because my last cycling trip where I went to Bukittinggi and the Padang area, I mean, that was landscape, the volcanoes, the villages, the rice fields, the ocean, the coastal roads, absolutely stunning. The landscapes of West Sumatra, the mountainous area there, and of course the people of Indonesia. Interestingly enough, they're a big part of the experience of being in Indonesia, but there isn't, for me, a lot of variety in them. So I don't think about individual people so much. I think about the people as a whole. So every time I go out into Tanjung Balai and I run into more people and we have a conversation, it's generally the same conversation. And so it's hard to appreciate all the people here as like individuals with rich personal lives. Like I get to know this person and get to know their family and get to know their life. There isn't a whole lot of that going on because people seem to be living basically the same life, and my interaction with them follows a very familiar pattern. But the people as a whole, as a population, as a group, yeah, they stand out for me. And the landscape and the urban landscape, like the neighborhoods. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers that question directly, but yeah, I guess it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm talking again because I looked at my notes and I see that I wrote down Ethiopia, and I have the word landscape beside Ethiopia because Ethiopia has, like for me, Ethiopia goes in that category of unique countries. Like if I had to pick like 5 countries in the world that are just, wow, what a place, that are unique, have their own thing going on, South Korea would make the list, and Ethiopia would make the list. Another crazy place. But Ethiopia has an unbelievable landscape, and that makes a big impression because it has the northern mountainous plateau, the Simien Mountains, the drier area around Axum, the cliffs. I mean, it's just stunning what's there. The salt flats. And then you come off the mountains down into the African savanna, head out towards the border with Sudan, the Nile River Valley, and then go even like the borders with the countries to the south, Kenya, Tanzania. That's a whole other landscape. go out into the deserts around, what's the Muslim city, Harar? I mean, that's a whole other landscape. I mean, Ethiopia is just incredible for that. So that's why I wrote down landscape. But stop for a second and think about the people of Ethiopia. Wow, amazing people, distinct people. And I remember Ethiopia so much more in terms of individuals. Every individual there seemed to have a rich, different personality, really standing out from the other people around them. And like, I don't run into that here in Indonesia, where people kind of seem very, very similar to each other. But Ethiopians, man, individualistic. Powerful personalities and interests. Very, very interesting country. So, yeah, just wanted to add that to my answer. Well, there you are. June, ask me anything. I probably went on too long talking about books and movies and documentaries, things like that. But hey, why not? And yeah, I didn't even finish my cup of coffee. I had so much to talk about, I let it get cold. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed some of the answers to my questions, and shutting down for now, and I'll see you in the next video.